Hey guys, it is now time for Ransom Chapter 4. When we last saw these students, they were locked. Well, the boys were locked in the storeroom because Glenn got a little lippy with Buck, and that's what happened to the boys. The girls could sleep out in the bunk room. Now we're going to switch settings in Chapter 4. Chapter 4, we go to the parents. You're probably wondering, what are the parents doing at this point? Do they know where their kids are? What's going on? So that's where we're at. So turn with me to Chapter 4, page 48, and follow along as I read, please. The calls began at 6 o'clock, hence the telephone picture that our son Augustus drew for you. For Mrs. French, the telephone was ringing when she opened the front door. Pausing in the hallway to remove her coat and gloves, she called, "Jessie, will you get that, dear?" There was no answer, and the phone continued ringing. "Jessie," Mrs. French called again, and then, with a shrug of loving impatience, muttering, "That girl, probably in her room reading or so deep in her daydreams she doesn't even hear it." She hurried into the living room. The telephone was on a table in the corner, and she plucked the receiver from the hook with one hand while removing her hat with the other. "Hello?" There was a pause, and then a voice asked, "Mrs. French?" "Yes." She was disentangling the hat from a bobby pin, which was holding it, and dropped it onto the table. "This is she?" "I'm calling about your daughter." "About Jessie?" The statement caught her by surprise. "What about her? Who is this anyway?" "Just a friend," the voice said. "Someone who wants to be sure your daughter comes back to you safely. By this time, you must know that she is gone." "Gone? Jessie?" Automatically, Mrs. French's eyes flew to the curving stairway that led to the second floor. "I don't know what you mean. Gone where?" "A long way from here," said the voice. "To a place where she will not be found. I am the only one who can bring her back to you safely." Mrs. French shook her head in disbelief. "I don't know who you are, but you must be crazy. Jessie hasn't gone anywhere. She's upstairs in her room." "Are you sure?" asked the voice. "Have you looked? Have you seen her since school let out this afternoon?" "No, but I just got home myself. I was at a committee meeting of the Officers' Wives Club. I'm sure—" Abruptly, Mrs. French dropped the receiver onto the table. "Jessie!" she called out. "Jessie, come down here!" Without pausing for an answer, she crossed the living room to the stairs and started up them. "Jessie!" Several moments went by before she returned to the telephone. Her hand was trembling as she picked up the receiver. When she spoke, her voice was very low. "Where is Jessie? What have you done with my daughter?" Now we go to a different parent's household. $15,000? Rod Donovan exclaimed incredulously. "Why, that's impossible. I don't have that kind of money." "You can get it," the voice said. "That is, if seeing the girl again is important to you." "If it's important," Mr. Donovan forced his voice into control. "Look here now. How do I know that Marianne is with you? I want you to let her speak to me." "That is impossible." "Why is it impossible? If you have hurt her—" "She isn't hurt, Mr. Donovan. Not yet, anyway. She is not here to speak to you. She is being held in another place. The thing for you to do is to get the money." Mr. Donovan drew a long breath. If I can manage to get together that much money somehow, where do you want me to take it? How do I get it to you?" "Don't worry about that," the voice told him. "You just get the money, and I'll let you know what to do with it. Oh, and another thing. It would be a mistake for you to call the police. A very bad mistake." "Well, let me tell you something, whoever you are," Rod Donovan said tightly. "When you call again to tell me where to bring the money, you have Marianne there at the telephone. I want to hear her voice, and I want to hear her tell me that she is unharmed. If Marianne doesn't speak to me, I will know that this is a trick, that you don't have her at all. In that case, you will not get a single penny." There was a pause, and then the voice said, "It is not you who are making the rules, Mr. Donovan. You will do what I tell you if you want to see the girl again. What I tell you now is to get the money and stay at home and wait until I call you." There was a click, and the wire went blank. Rod Donovan stood holding the receiver, listening to the sudden silence on the other end of the wire. Then he lowered it slowly and replaced it on the hook. From the kitchen, his wife called, "Rod, was that Marianne?" Is she at somebody's house? I can't imagine what is making her so late. No, it wasn't Mary Ann. I'll tell you about it in a minute. Rod stood unmoving, staring at the telephone. Then, on impulse, he lifted the hook and dialed a number. Hello, Steve. This is Rod Donovan. I wonder, can your boy Glenn come to the telephone? Why, no, Rod, Mr. Kirtland said, surprised. Glenn hasn't come home yet. Was there something you needed to talk to him about? No, not really. I just wondered if he'd got home all right. It's several hours since school let out. You're not worried about him, are you? Worried? Good grief, no. Mr. Kirtland was amused at the question. Glenn has so many activities, he seldom gets home much before dinner time. Today I think he went over to the garage to pick up his car. He's been having it painted. Say, Rod, he was frankly curious, what is all this about anyway? Is something the matter? I don't know. I just wanted to check on something. You haven't received any phone calls from him or about him? Not unless he called his mother before I got home. Come to think of it, Bruce isn't home yet either. Now, that is kind of funny. Bruce always takes a school bus. Glenn took the bus today, too, Rod Donovan said quietly. I stopped by the school this afternoon and saw him through the bus window. He was sitting with Mary Ann. Funny, I guess he got off at some other stop. Maybe he went home with a friend or something. Anyway, he'll be coming in soon. That's one thing you can count on with our boys. Mr. Kirtland laughed good-naturedly. Neither one of them would miss dinner. Well, look, Mr. Donovan said slowly, I want you to do something for me. If you should receive a phone call from Glenn or about him or Bruce, what are you being so mysterious about? Mr. Kirtland was beginning to be impatient. I don't understand what it is you want to know. Hasn't Mary Ann come home yet? Is that it? You think she's gone someplace with Glenn? Just phone me, Rod Donovan said. If Glenn comes home or if you have any communication about him, please. All right, sure, if you want me to. Mr. Kirtland hung up in bewilderment. His wife, who had been reading the paper, glanced up with interest. What on earth was that all about? Mr. Kirtland shook his head. Darned if I know. It was Rod Donovan, Marion's new husband. I wonder if he has a screw loose or something. Heavens, why? Mrs. Kirtland laid down the paper. He may not be a dynamo like Jack Paget, but he seems normal enough. What was that about Mary Ann's being with Glenn? It wouldn't be surprising. All the girls follow Glenn around as though he were the Pied Piper. He said to phone him if we hear from Glenn, or if we get another kind of phone call. I couldn't make out what he meant. I can't imagine, Mrs. Kirtland began. It was then that the telephone rang. Now we go to a different house. Mark Crete was not at home when the phone rang in his bedroom. Mr. Crete was a 40-year-old bachelor with a time-consuming social life which he had not tried to alter in any major way when his nephew came to live with him. I am not the father type, he had said, and none of his friends had disagreed with him. The statement was too true to be argued. The telephone rang at half-hour intervals all evening. It was 3:15 when Mark Crete finally pulled into the driveway. He left his car parked there, not bothering to put it in the garage, and went into the house. He did not stop at Dexter's room. He did not stop anywhere. He went straight to his bedroom and, pausing only long enough to remove his shoes, tumbled wearily onto his bed. After a few minutes, he stirred himself enough to get up and run a glass of water. He drank it and then, leaving the bathroom light burning, he returned to his room. With a gigantic yawn, he lowered himself to the bed for the second time, and then on impulse reached out and flicked the switch on the bedside telephone, shutting it off for the rest of the night. That concludes Chapter 4. Now remember, when I'm going to read Chapter 5 as well and post that too, your assignment that goes along with Chapters 4 and 5 is to fill in the reading log, which I will also be sending. So stay tuned, Chapter 5, what's going to happen with these kids. See you in a bit.
Bye.